Hello, beautiful beings. Welcome to Soul Shift Messages. If you found your way here, trust there's something in this message for you. Understand this space is about growth, truth, and transformation. We don't bypass here. We don't sugarcoat. And not every message will feel comfortable, but it will be honest. I speak in flow, and sometimes that includes cussing. It's just part of how the messages come through. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and trust your own discernment above all else. Take a deep breath, and let's begin. If you're new here, please know at this time I post weekly content in 3 parts. Part 1 focuses on what needs to be revealed. Part 2 focuses on what needs to be understood. Tends to look at the underlying mechanisms of what's at play. And part 3 focuses on what needs to be done. What changes do we need to make to embody whatever we happen to be discussing that week? Based on when you find this video, you will either find all links to available content below in the description box, or you'll see when to expect that content. So I'm pretty good about going back and updating that description box. So if you don't see it yet, it's on its way. Fear not. All right. I say all that to say this is going to be part 2 of this week's topic, which is internal gridlock. Internal gridlock is when your inner system loses harmony and begins fighting itself. So you got different aspects of yourself fighting one another. So ain't nobody got time for that. And that's exactly why we are addressing it at this time. So let me go ahead and dive into this message. This is another longer message. We're definitely doing deeper dives into some complex stuff at this time. So I don't love to mostly read a message, but I am going to respect the need that this needs to be one video and the whole message needs to be delivered, while also balancing out the fact that you're taking time out of your day to watch this video. So I don't think we're going to do this forever, but it's definitely a theme, and I am going to honor it. So let's do it. I am calling this message When Life Feels Like Something to Manage Instead of Live. So the core reality of the internal gridlock. This is not simple indecision, laziness, weakness, lack of discipline, or lack of insight. The paralysis comes from multiple parts of the self trying to prevent different forms of danger at the same time. One part is trying to protect against shame, emotional exposure, dependence, instability, rejection, moral compromise, corruption, loss of control, vulnerability, disappointment, irreversible mistakes, relational conflict, and becoming overwhelmed. Another part is trying to protect against emptiness, emotional starvation, numbness, isolation, invisibility, stagnation, meaninglessness, deadness, loss of vitality, loss of authentic selfhood. Ooh, you are not going to defeat me today. Loss of authentic selfhood, unlived life, and emotional imprisonment. These systems want opposite things, so internally there is constant tension between restraint versus desire, safety versus aliveness, structure versus freedom, control versus surrender, caution versus immersion, autonomy versus connection, authenticity versus belonging, transcendence versus embodiment, ambition versus purity, vulnerability versus self-protection, invisibility versus recognition, possibility versus reality, and stability versus transformation. Both sides believe they are protecting survival. One side believes if you fully open yourself, everything could become unstable. The other believes if you remain guarded forever, you will slowly disappear inside. The psyche keeps searching for a path where nothing is lost. No contradiction exists. No vulnerability is exposed. No irreversible mistake is made. No regret becomes possible. No identity is threatened. No moral compromise occurs. No one is hurt and no uncertainty remains. But no such path exists. So movement freezes. For some of you who feel stuck, it is because of this. It is this internal gridlock that is going on. And I'm hearing it's okay to recognize you are in this situation. Again, this is part 2. We're trying to understand what is truly at play and what is driving this so that when we get to part 3, we can start laying the groundwork of how to move through this and frankly get out of it. All right. The psyche has turned life into something to be correctly managed. Some of the deepest patterns present is that life no longer feels like something to directly live. It feels like something to navigate correctly, interpret correctly, manage correctly, emotionally regulate correctly, respond to correctly, understand correctly, and survive correctly. You are not simply living. You are continuously trying to orient yourself properly within life. This often develops in people who became psychologically responsible very early. Responsible for emotional environments, minimizing danger, anticipating reactions, maintaining stability, understanding what others needed, and responsible for preventing emotional disruption. But over time, spontaneity begins to feel unsafe or irresponsible. The psyche learns I must remain aware at all times. Eventually, this creates profound exhaustion because you lose the ability to simply feel, want, rest, enjoy, grieve, desire, and participate without simultaneously monitoring yourself. Existence itself becomes overmanaged. The core psychological structure, the internal system, is not unintelligent. In fact, it is highly perceptive, adaptive, emotionally sensitive, psychologically observant, symbolically aware, emotionally attuned, and internally complex. The problem is this protective intelligence has overdeveloped and divided against itself. The psyche appears organized around monitoring, anticipating, evaluating, regulating, predicting, interpreting, self-correcting, emotionally preparing, and preventing risk. It is continuously scanning for contradictions, hidden motives, emotional danger, moral implications, relational consequences, instability, disappointment, loss of control, exposure, and possible future regrets. This creates an exhausting internal environment where spontaneous movement rarely feels safe. I don't know who needs to hear this, but I just keep hearing it's not your fault. It's not your fault. This is not about blame. It is not about shame. It is about putting words to what you are feeling and bringing it from your unconscious mind into your conscious mind so that the work to move through it, recognize it, and ultimately resolve it can take place. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to, babies. This is your invitation. The fear of desire. At the center of the conflict is a deep suspicion toward desire itself. There appears to be an internal belief, conscious or unconscious, that strong desire may be dangerous, destabilizing, selfish, corrupting, humiliating, morally compromising, and emotionally risky. This includes desire for intimacy, visibility, recognition, pleasure, influence, success, rest, emotional nourishment, power, expansion, aliveness, creative expression, emotional honesty, and being deeply known. The internal logic often becomes, if I want something intensely, I should distrust it. Or if something feels emotionally powerful, it may not be safe. As a result, desire becomes monitored. Impulses become analyzed. Longing becomes moralized. Needs become softened. Vitality becomes fragmented. And enthusiasm becomes questioned. Natural human drives become entangled with guilt, fear, shame, caution, self-surveillance, and emotional hesitation. If this is reminding you of the series I did on fully embodying your sexuality, yes. We're really diving deep with some of these topics, and you are going to see how some of the previous series I completed is tied into this. I keep hearing excavating. We're going to the root of a lot of this shit. I'm hearing honor your pacing with this. If you're new here, I don't delete content. So if you need to slow down your pacing, just know you're not gonna miss anything. I don't delete things, even though I recently watched a older video I did and I was like, ooh, that was rough, but not gonna delete it. Created it for a reason and people are still watching it, so that's how it's gonna be. We're all learning, we're all growing, we're all improving. Honor your pace. The fear of authentic expression. There is also fear surrounding authenticity itself. Not just fear of rejection, but fear that full truth could destabilize relationships, overwhelm others, expose hidden tensions, create irreversible consequences, unleash uncontrollable emotions, destroy existing structures, and reveal needs that cannot be met. So authenticity becomes carefully rationed. This creates patterns where emotions are revealed indirectly. Needs are softened before expression. Anger becomes analysis. Grief becomes philosophy. Desire becomes abstraction. Intensity becomes filtered, and truth becomes intellectualized instead of embodied. You may become extremely articulate about emotional reality while still struggling to directly inhabit it. This creates the painful experience of understanding yourself deeply while still feeling internally distant from yourself. The self-interruption cycle. The psyche appears caught in a patterned interruption loop. The cycle often looks like this. A real desire or authentic impulse emerges. Energy and momentum begin building. Excitement, hope, or emotional intensity appear. Internal alarms activate. The mind begins analyzing consequences, meanings, risks, implications, contradictions, moral concerns, and relational fallout. Multiple internal voices begin conflicting. Contradiction becomes intolerable. Momentum collapses. The action becomes delayed, softened, indirected, intellectualized, abandoned, or endlessly revised. Exhaustion, resentment, numbness, shame, or collapse follow, and the cycle repeats. This is not random inconsistency. It's a protective system designed to stop movement before consequences can fully occur. It is intentional. And they want you to assume positive intent. Your system is actually trying to protect you. It does not understand it is overdeveloped and has overstayed its welcome. That's why we're doing this series. We're going to help it walk itself back into something that is more healthy, more sustainable. The intolerance of contradiction. One of the deepest issues is difficulty tolerating conflicting truths at the same time. Examples include wanting closeness while fearing dependence, wanting visibility while distrusting attention, wanting power while fearing corruption, wanting freedom while fearing instability, wanting authenticity while fearing rejection, wanting rest while fearing stagnation, wanting embodiment while fearing loss of control, and wanting intimacy while fearing emotional capture. Instead of allowing these contradictions to coexist naturally, the psyche tries to resolve them into one completely correct position before acting. But human beings are inherently contradictory, and no perfect alignment ever arrives. So action keeps getting postponed. This also creates cycles of certainty followed by reversal, ambition followed by collapse, expansion followed by withdrawal, idealism followed by cynicism, reinvention followed by exhaustion, and overcommitment followed by self-sabotage. The psyche temporarily commits to one side while suppressing the opposite side. It's not healthy, babies. It is not sustainable. Eventually, the suppressed side resurfaces and destabilizes the structure. So life becomes a repeating cycle of rebuilding, overreaching, collapsing, reevaluating, and starting over. This is why things don't land. This is why things don't shift. Constant interruption. Nothing gets to settle in. Again, I'm hearing it's not your fault. The internal world treats choice as identity defining. Babies, I don't know why, but they keep bringing me back to my imposter syndrome series as well. This is tied to that as well. You're going to see how a lot of these things are interconnected. Anything else about that? Some of you may have recently watched that series. Okay, we'll leave it there. All right, another important layer is choices appear connected to identity, morality, future regret, self-definition, relational consequence, and existential correctness. The psyche behaves as though one wrong movement could permanently contaminate the future. This creates enormous pressure around decision making. The system wants guarantees before movement, but life cannot provide guarantees. So hesitation begins feeling safer than commitment, and potential feels emotionally safer than irreversible reality. This contributes to chronic preparation, overthinking, delayed action, remaining in possibility instead of embodiment, and fear of fully committing to lived experience. Possibility has become safer than reality. Fantasy, imagination, symbolic possibility, and imagined futures appear emotionally safer than direct embodiment. Why? Because possibility cannot fully fail, fully disappoint, expose ordinary limitation, collapse in the same way reality can, force grief, and cannot reveal incompatibility. Why? Because it's not real. Reality always introduces imperfection, compromise, uncertainty, unpredictability, limitation, and vulnerability. So the psyche may unconsciously preserve itself in states of contemplation, becoming, imagining, preparing, fantasizing about reinvention, and symbolic longing. This allows vitality to exist psychologically without requiring full confrontation with lived reality. But eventually, imagined life and lived life begin diverging. That divergence creates grief and frustration. Over-identification with self-monitoring. A large amount of psychic energy appears devoted to observing thoughts, tracking motives, evaluating reactions, monitoring emotional states, interpreting symbolic meaning, anticipating consequences, scanning for contradiction, managing presentation, and regulating emotional exposure. This creates a split between the self that experiences life and the self that constantly watches and evaluates the experience. The observing system has become dominant. Spontaneity gets interrupted before it can fully unfold. You are not simply living life. You are continuously interpreting yourself while living it. This creates exhaustion, detachment, overanalysis, emotional hesitation, difficulty trusting instinct, and loss of immediacy. The split between thinking and embodiment. Much of life appears processed through analysis, abstraction, symbolic thinking, interpretation, anticipation, internal dialogue, and recursive reflection. Emotions often become conceptualized before they are fully felt physically. Instead of directly experiencing grief, anger, fear, longing, disappointment, vulnerability, and desire, the mind immediately begins explaining, theorizing, contextualizing, reframing, predicting, and negotiating internally. This creates distance from instinct, emotional clarity, embodied truth, direct feeling, and spontaneous participation in life. The result becomes intellectual self-understanding without emotional movement. Identity maintenance and fear of collapse. Many parts of the psyche appear organized around preserving identities such as being good, ethical, insightful, spiritually aware, resilient, emotionally intelligent, self-controlled, self-sacrificing, principled, exceptional, and deeply aware. These identities are not false, but they have become rigid, protective structures. I'm hearing they no longer serve. The fear underneath is if I acknowledge my anger, ambition, hunger, sexuality, envy, exhaustion, selfishness, ordinariness, dependency, grief, or neediness, then my identity may collapse. So the deeper question beneath the paralysis is not what should I do? It's who am I allowed to be? This is why even small decisions can feel emotionally loaded. contamination anxiety, and moral rigidity. Reality appears unconsciously divided into categories such as pure versus corrupt, authentic versus artificial, meaningful versus empty, liberated versus compromised, and morally clean versus contaminated. When this split becomes rigid, ordinary human participation starts feeling psychologically dangerous. Then ambition feels morally risky. Success feels suspicious. Pleasure feels weakening. Dependence feels humiliating. Visibility feels unsafe. Emotional needs feel shameful. And relationships feel compromising. The psyche also appears extremely protective of innocence. There is a fear of becoming selfish, manipulative, exploitative, cynical, emotionally hardened, and morally compromised. This is part of why desire becomes monitored. Aggression becomes suppressed. Self-assertion feels dangerous, and power feels morally charged. Healthy life force gets redirected inward. This contributes to self-criticism, paralysis, hidden resentment, and collapse after over-control. The relationship to power, visibility, and being known. There is strong striving energy present. The psyche contains ambition, intensity, creativity, hunger, vision, desire for meaning, desire for transformation, and desire for expansion. But there is also fear surrounding visibility, influence, leadership, magnetism, authority, emotional impact, being fully seen, taking up space, and deep intimacy. Power appears associated with corruption, ego inflation, danger, exposure, expectation, obligation, loss of integrity, and loss of safety. The psyche appears deeply ambivalent about being known. One part longs for recognition, emotional intimacy, authentic understanding, mutual revelation, and deep connection. Another fears exposure, intrusion, dependency, misinterpretation, emotional capture, obligation, and loss of autonomy. This creates patterns such as selective vulnerability, compartmentalization, alternating openness and withdrawal, fear after intimacy, and hidden internal distance. There may also be a belief that if someone fully sees me, they may eventually reject, burden, control, misunderstand, or consume me. Invisibility becomes both painful and protective. And I'm hearing they can be both simultaneously. Externally, you may appear highly capable, while internally preventing full emergence. Ambition, therefore, becomes fragmented into bursts of intensity, fantasies of transformation, overreaching, collapse, self-sabotage, withdrawal, and fantasies of escape or reinvention. Adaptation, relationships, and fawning. A large portion of the psyche appears organized around adaptation to other people. Safety may once have depended on anticipating reactions, minimizing conflict, reading emotional environments, suppressing authentic impulses, staying emotionally useful, becoming psychologically manageable, maintaining harmony, and preventing disruption. This creates a survival pattern where identity develops through adaptation rather than direct self-definition. You changed yourself to be who people needed you to be instead of just being who you are, babies. I'm hearing a lot of you are starting to recognize that this goes back to your childhood. Some of you may identify with the inner child. Some of you are really craving play. I'm hearing some of you are really craving sweets. Somebody may really want pizza. That's your inner child asking for nourishment. I don't know why, but I just heard Shirley Temple. Someone wants a Shirley Temple. Those are my shit when I don't want to drink. I always ask for 2 cherries. Why get one when they'll give you 2? Like, anywho. But yeah, some of you are trying to fight that impulse. That younger part of you wants nourishment. They want nourishment. They don't want you to care about a summer body right now. Don't be fighting those impulses. That is more healing than you think. I'm hearing lean into that. All right. As a result, emotional, I just heard jelly beans. Anything else with that? All right. Somebody likes jelly beans. As a result, emotional attunement becomes highly developed and perception becomes extremely sharp, but authentic self-recognition becomes difficult. Questions emerge like, what do I genuinely want? Or who am I when I stop adapting? Authentic, self-directed movement may trigger danger responses because individuation becomes associated with relational risk. Some of you need to look up what individuation means, but it's essentially where you start. It's like basically when you start becoming your own person. You don't adapt to the group anymore. You kind of stand in who you are and just let others kind of respond to that. You don't mold yourself. It's not that group pack thinking. I'm hearing hive mind. Some of you will resonate with hive mind. That's not that. That's individuation is actually stepping out of that type of dynamic. But yeah, some of you may want to research that a little bit more. Many internal crabs in a bucket. That's going to make sense to someone. Crabs in a bucket. If it doesn't, don't take it. All right? We good on that? Excellent. Thank you. Many internal conflicts are therefore not about the decision itself. They are about the feared emotional consequences of becoming more fully one's self. The relationship to struggle, scarcity, and worth. There appears to be an unconscious attachment to endurance, deprivation, emotional withholding, self-denial, struggle, usefulness, and constant internal effort. So for some of you, that inner child craving, I just heard lollipops. Tootsie Pops are the shit too, the orange ones. If you know, you know. That is part of the reason why they don't want you to ignore that, is because that is tied to deprivation. Some of you really keep yourselves in deprivation spirals. Some of you really force yourself to eat very strict diets. Oh, we're going a little deep with this. All right. So, going back to what I talked about earlier, where like there's competing things, right? So think of it as like eating healthy over here, and I'm just going to say indulging, right? Obviously, have moderation, right? You can't just fill your body with crap and expect everything to go well all the time. But some of you are so heavily in eating healthy on this side that you're actually becoming unbalanced. Like this is actually what is, you're actually suppressing this side by taking that stance. And your guidance is to loosen that up. So whatever you are craving, even if you consider it junk food, again, that's suppressing this, which is making this craving stronger. And you are feeding that deprivation cycle. And what they want you to know is, if you just got that craving and ate this thing, whatever this indulgent type of thing is, like if you just didn't push that off, you just were like, you know what, I just want this, and you go and you get it, that you would actually bring that back into balance easier. For some of you, the more you suppress this, the more that shit comes back to bite you. I don't know why, but I'm hearing like someone saying like, I'm eating like a trash panda right now. Again, it's that deprivation cycle. If you just like, let's just say chips, right? Say you like chips, but you're trying to eat healthier and all that kind of stuff. If you get a craving for chips, your guidance is don't ignore it. You know, do it in moderation. Get a smaller bag if you can. Don't eat it all in one go. Bring it to a party, bring it to a gathering, and that way, you know, communal sharing of calories, you know, and that way you can scratch that itch, but not keep throwing yourself in a deprivation cycle. That is for someone. Are we good on that? You're welcome. Thank you. All right, where was I? Here. Thank you. Worth may unconsciously feel tied to resilience, self-control, emotional labor, awareness, productivity, endurance, and usefulness. Possible unconscious beliefs include suffering proves sincerity, needing less is safer, deprivation protects integrity, struggle gives meaning, self-sacrifice creates safety, rest must be earned, having needs burdens others, and good people endure quietly. As a result, nourishment itself may feel destabilizing. The psyche deeply wants intimacy, reciprocity, rest, connection, expansion, emotional fulfillment, care, pleasure, and safety, but simultaneously distrusts receiving them. This creates a painful contradiction of longing for nourishment while guarding against it. Suppressed needs eventually re-emerge through burnout, collapse, emotional swings, compulsive fantasy, hidden resentment, withdrawal, numbness, and fantasies of escape. Exhaustion and protective shutdown. The psyche appears chronically overextended internally because you never fully shut off and you never stop actually fighting yourself. Enormous energy is spent regulating emotion, monitoring behavior, containing impulses, anticipating consequences, negotiating contradictions, suppressing needs, managing emotional risk, maintaining internal order, and staying psychologically prepared. Over time, this creates fatigue, inertia, emotional flattening, numbness, inability to initiate, collapse states, and motivational shutdown. Not because desire is absent, but because the system is overloaded. It needs a break. Rest may unconsciously trigger guilt, anxiety, fear of stagnation, fear of becoming indulgent, and fear of becoming unworthy. The psyche may only allow rest after exhaustion becomes undeniable. In this sense, paralysis becomes partially a protective shutdown response. Again, the paralysis is trying to protect you from yourself. I keep hearing assume positive intent with this, even if this is uncomfortable, even if you don't like it. Again, it's overdeveloped, and we can walk it back into something healthy and sustainable. The fear of hope. Hope itself may feel dangerous. If earlier experiences taught openness leads to pain, desire leads to disappointment, trust leads to betrayal, visibility leads to attack, dependence leads to loss, and effort leads to collapse, then emotional investment begins to feel unsafe. The psyche may unconsciously reduce expectation to reduce vulnerability. Part of the self may prefer controlled disappointment over uncertain hope. I'm hearing you heard that right. Part of the self may prefer controlled disappointment over uncertain hope. This quietly maintains stagnation. The conflict between transcendence and human life. One part of the psyche longs for purity, transcendence, higher meaning, clarity, symbolic understanding, spiritual or intellectual mastery, and complete coherence. Another part deeply longs for sensuality, pleasure, grounding, emotional immediacy, intimacy, ordinary human participation, and embodied life. These desires are unconsciously treated as incompatible. The psyche fears if I fully enter human life, I may lose my integrity, while simultaneously fearing if I remain detached from life, I will lose my vitality. There is also difficulty tolerating ordinary human limitation itself. Part of the psyche longs for perfect certainty, complete self-understanding, irreversible transformation, total coherence, final resolution, and morally purified desire. But human life is messy, contradictory, unfinished, partial, emotionally mixed, and uncertain. This makes gradual healing, imperfect relationships, ordinary happiness, partial progress, and ambiguity feel emotionally insufficient at times. Part of the suffering comes from resisting the unfinished nature of reality itself. Existential loneliness. There are signs of profound existential loneliness underneath the entire structure. Not merely social loneliness, but the feeling that inner experience is difficult to fully translate. Authentic complexity may never feel fully receivable. Some parts of the self remain fundamentally unshared, and deep understanding may always feel incomplete. This can create emotional self-containment, intense inner worlds, over-reliance on internal processing, longing for impossible levels of recognition, and psychic isolation even within connection. There may be grief around the feeling that no matter how close connection becomes, some part of the experience remains unreachable. The grief beneath everything. Underneath the entire system is grief, deep grief, for unmet emotional reciprocity, emotional isolation, lost time, self-abandonment, impossible standards, exhaustion from constant self-management, unlived versions of the self, identities that never became livable, vitality sacrificed for survival, relationships built around adaptation rather than authenticity, and years spent trying to become safe enough to fully live. The mind keeps trying to solve, optimize, reinterpret, negotiate, and analyze what the emotional core already knows cannot be repaired through thoughts alone. Analysis becomes a way of postponing grief. The deepest issue is not actually fear alone. It's conditional permission to exist. The psyche appears organized around the belief that full selfhood must be earned through correctness, awareness, restraint, coherence, morality, self-control, emotional management, understanding, and purification, as though self-acceptance can only occur once all motives are purified, all fears disappear, all contradictions are resolved, all uncertainty is eliminated, all needs are justified, all identities perfectly align, and all emotional conflict disappears. But contradiction is not failure. Ambivalence is not corruption. Need is not weakness. Desire is not moral collapse. Dependency is not humiliation. And ordinary human limitation is not spiritual failure. Human beings do not become whole by eliminating contradiction. Wholeness comes from remaining internally connected even while contradiction exists. The goal is not internal perfection. The goal is internal coexistence. What healing actually requires. Nothing here suggests brokenness, emptiness, incapacity, lack of depth, or lack of intelligence. The system is highly intelligent, emotionally perceptive, adaptive, symbolically aware, and deeply sensitive. But it has become fragmented into competing protective systems that no longer trust one another. The way forward is not harsher discipline, more self-control, perfection, transcendence, eliminating fear, eliminating desire, becoming morally flawless. Is anyone morally flawless? I don't even think that's possible. Achieving total certainty, endless self-monitoring, or becoming better through over-control. Healing comes through integration. Integration, babies. That means allowing mixed motives, tolerating ambivalence, accepting contradiction, reconnecting desire with ethics instead of splitting them apart, distinguishing intuition from fear, grieving unrealistic identities, allowing authentic feeling without immediate analysis, learning that authenticity does not automatically create abandonment, building relationships that do not require self-erasure, allowing rest without guilt, participating in life before certainty arrives, accepting gradual growth instead of demanding total transformation, and allowing opposing parts of the self to coexist without trying to destroy one another. The deepest healing begins when the self no longer has to divide against itself in order to feel safe. And the deepest lock begins to loosen when every movement is no longer treated as a potential moral, emotional, relational, or existential catastrophe. All right, that's all I had, and I was told to leave it there. All right. I will be back later this week with part 3, which will focus on what needs to be done, what action do we need to take in terms of internal gridlock. So keep an eye out for that. Either you'll see it in the description box below or just know it's coming. So take care of yourselves, beautiful beings. We're diving deep. Be good to yourself. Until next time, bye.